Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Wavelength.
The real issue with data privacy is who's collecting your data behind the scenes, so in the back end of it, and who is that being shared with.
Sparking the convos about Adelaide.
It's every woman's choice. If they choose to have an abortion, then so be it.
You should be having...
These issues need to be properly investigated, and we need to make sure that LGBTIQ people are supported to be who they are.
On Fresh 92.7.
Welcome to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. I'm your host, David, and tonight I am joined by Aj. What a weekend it has been.
Yes, it's been an incredible weekend. Trump is out.
Goodbye.
He's Biden. Yeah, no, I'm really keen about that. I was... Look, I'll be honest, I'm a little disheartened about how close the race was.
Yeah, it's a bit disappointing in a way.
But at the same time, so many states where they were like swinging towards Trump at the beginning and you were like, oh, come on. And then like so many of them were just like, no run, mate.
Yeah, it was a wild week, but I'm happy that he's gone. I mean, we've still got 10 weeks until he actually leaves. So we'll see what he gets up to in that time.
Yeah, he's going to do a lot. He's going to wreck the place before he leaves. He's a terrible tenant. Anyway, tonight I'm asking whether our self-defence laws need a refresh after a judge found Jordan Grantham guilty of using excessive self-defence when defending himself from a serial Hindley Street pest. We want to know what needs to change in the legal system.
We'll also be letting you know everything you need to know about the coronavirus this week. But next, we're going to find out whether we should be totally switching off from social media entirely. You're listening to Fresh.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. So, Aj, this week was absolutely nuts with the election in the US. And I don't know about you, but I found myself doom scrolling all week and refreshing the New York Times website basically every hour and checking Twitter constantly.
Yeah, no, I remember Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night, at around 9 o'clock, I would switch off my phone. I would actually have to turn off my phone because I would just non-stop hit the refresh button, Google it again, and just the anxiety when I see those numbers, still 49%, you're just like, oh!
They weren't budging for ages either.
I know, and yeah, it was just terrifying. The memes were great, though. The memes were amazing.
Killer week for memes. Anyway, this week Amila spoke with Sora Park from the University of Canberra to find out whether we should be logging off from social media for good.
Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
While we've all gotten used to having the internet and social media in our lives, this year has felt like an avalanche of bad news for many. So how much time should we really be investing on our screens before it makes us feel worse? I talked to Sora Park, Professor of Communications at the University of Canberra, about the phenomenon of doom scrolling and what it does to our well-being.
Almost everyone is a culprit of doom scrolling, I think. Anyone who has a mobile phone and has access to the internet will probably be doing it without even realizing it. So people go on social media or some app or website and they keep going even though they know they won't feel good about it. And even though they don't want to, they find themselves continuing to scroll.
So would you say it's kind of inevitable that once you do go on your phone, you will just feel these negative feelings and kind of fall back into that loop?
Yes, I think most people will experience that. But then there are other constructive ways to be online as well. And that was kind of balanced during COVID, where people could see some constructive news about, with hope or, things that they can do during COVID, which often isn't the case like in political news or other news about economics or, about terrorism. Those news can hardly be constructive and positive. So I guess it's finding the right balance while you're online to make sure that you also access, good stories, positive stories, as well as the doom and gloom.
Flipping the switch and kind of looking at news organisations and their structure, Do you think there's any way for them to share information that doesn't tire people out?
No, I think news companies can do a lot more in delivering news that is more positive or more constructive or help people to manage their online time. In the past, news happened in regular routine cycles, so they didn't really have to worry about that. But because now everyone is online 24/7 and news providers are actually producing news 24/7, I think it's a good time to think about their practices to ensure that they provide the right balance between positive and, negative news, constructive versus, harmful news, so that will help people to find the right balance. But I don't think news companies are there yet because they're all competing to get news 24/7. And they haven't actually, reflected on how that might have an impact.
Do you see any type of future where people might actually be anti-social media?
Yes, I think lots of people are already. Having said that, that's like temporary measures it's similar to avoiding news. Eventually, you can't not be on social media because everyone else is on it and you miss out. So it is very difficult to, go against broad trends, and maybe it's not that desirable. The more desirable thing to do is to make sure that the trend is positive and that it does take into consideration the diversity of viewpoints and people's diversity in needs, so that people will be comfortable being on social media rather than thinking of it as being negative and something to protect themselves from.
I also hit the streets to see what people had to say about what they'd like to see change on social media.
I'm not sure if social media is necessarily the problem. You limit your exposure yourself, so you be disciplined with what's on there, with what you're seeing, rather than necessarily social media has to change. I think it's always probably going to be a little bit toxic sometimes, so I think it's your personal boundaries.
Well, people should use it a lot less so we can actually talk to people in person and see each other and actually build real relationships, and also not get their truth or news from there. Just read a book. It has much more value than the internet, although the internet does have all the information, but it doesn't discern between the truthful and the wrong information either.
I think more engaging content, more real life content, and people just being themselves, because I think people always portray something else or something they're not on social media.
Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having on Fresh 92.7.
That was Amila chatting with Sora Park from the University of Canberra about ditching social media for good. What do you think? Are you convinced?
I think that Sora made a lot of really good points, especially about looking for some of the good news.
Totally.
I think a lot of news companies should actually try and source and find some good news. So I remember when you pitched Heaps Good News at one of the meetings, I was like, yeah, actually that's be really good because a lot of the news that's going to be coming out this year would be really negative, yes. And it has been. And that was like one of the bright sparks of Wavelength this year, just kind of being like, oh, look at this really amazing thing despite all the doom and gloom.
Totally. I find it interesting, even when she was talking to people on the street, I agree that there is a bit of a responsibility that you have yourself to manage your internet usage, but the companies that make these apps and design the algorithms, they make them to be addictive. They make them that you stay on the platform and that you don't leave.
Oh, without a doubt, it's kind of like the pokies. It's designed to keep you going back and have that like negative feed loop. Where you're just like constantly being like, oh no, I know this is bad for me. I know this is terrible and it's toxic, but I can't help myself. Anyway, catching up after the break, I'll be diving into our main story for the evening about whether our self-defense laws need a refresh here in SA. You're listening to Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength with David and Aj this evening, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. So, Aj, you've put together this story about SA's self-defense laws, and I know you wanted to do this one after that case regarding Jordan Grantham. Can you tell us a bit about that before we crack into the story?
Yeah, so basically Jordan and a bunch of his mates, they were out on the town one night on Hindley Street. This is back in 2018. And there was this another guy called Jonathan Ridge. Now, he is heavily trained in mixed martial arts, and he went out that night looking for a fight. So he got drunk. He took about 6 MDMA tablets, and he actually went looking for a fight in a car park. Those guys pulled a gun on him, so he left that car park. And then he KO'd one of Jordan's mates. Jordan's gone to the bouncers asking for help. They've all gone, nah, it's not our problem. This is your problem. And in the fight that ensued, Jonathan got kicked in the head. And so with that, he actually went to the hospital. He was in the ICU for a little while. He had to relearn how to walk and talk. And so the judge said that even though you were in a fight for your life, you've gone over the line when it comes to self-defense. You've used unreasonable force.
Yep.
And so Jordan was actually facing 19 years in prison.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, he only got 6 months home detention, but still, that's a really long prison sentence for what I think is a life and death situation.
Absolutely. So do our self-defense laws need a refresh? First, you spoke with Craig Caldicott, a criminal defence lawyer here in SA.
Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
I spoke to Craig Caldicott, a criminal defence lawyer with decades of experience on the legal doctrine of self-defence to try and better understand the notion of reasonable and unreasonable force. Can you describe to us what circumstances would allow for you to claim self-defence?
If you're defending yourself or another, or indeed your property, you can utilise self-defence, but it's got to be proportionate to the perceived threat. But it doesn't have to be exact. And the other thing is that you can act in self-defence if you perceive you're about to be attacked or in some way struck by another person.
So the other person doesn't have to initiate the initial aggression.
The best way to answer that probably would be is if I'm sitting at the pub having a drink and I'm quiet and someone comes up, say walks up to me or gets inside my personal space. I perceive that he may be about to attack me. His fists are clenched. He may even be verbalising it and swearing and abusing you. And you perceive at that stage that you're about to be struck. You can strike first. Obviously, you can't go over the top. Like you can't pick up a basketball and hit him over the head or anything similar. Also, if you've got the ability to retreat and get out of there, then you should do that. The law recognises that if you have the means to avoid it, then you should.
Now, what does reasonable force mean? How is that sort of tested in the courts?
Well, reasonable force is an objective standard, and that's assessed by a magistrate or a judge or a jury as to a genuine belief. It may be totally erroneous, by the way. You might believe that you're about to be attacked, and it turns out that that person wasn't, by any stretch of the imagination, wasn't going to do that, but you had a genuine belief. But then it has to be then the force that you use, having regard to that genuine belief, was reasonably proportionate.
So with these matters, are they generally referred to a jury trial, a judge-only trial? How are these matters determined and who makes that determination?
Well, most assault matters or self-defence matters are dealt with in the magistrate, so it's a magistrate dealing with them. In a offence that's more serious, what we have is, say, in a murder case, if your self-defence is excessive in all the circumstances, then it turns murder into manslaughter.
Now, there is a particular case, I won't reference it by name, as one of the matters is still before the courts. But in this particular case, an attacker was drunk on alcohol and had taken a number of MDMA tablets, as well as being trained in various forms of martial arts and most likely mixed martial arts. Now, he went out in 2018 and he attempted to assault a number of men in a parking lot, where they then pulled a gun and to deter him from that. He left that particular scene and he ended up assaulting another group on Hindley Street, rendering one of them unconscious in a single blow. Now, he was left with severe head injuries and after a kick to the head. The judge determined that whilst the threat to that person was genuine, the line, that grey line between reasonable and unreasonable force was crossed. Now, the judge handed down a 6-month home detention sentence for one of the defendants. The other defendant is still before the court. Now, they were unable to suspend the sentence due to legislation that was introduced by Parliament. Do you believe that these laws have sort of circumscribed the reasonable defence that a citizen can employ?
My view always has been that judges should have an unfettered discretion having regard to all the facts and circumstances of the case.
Wavelength. Sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having on Fresh 92.7.
That there was speaking with Craig Caldicott, a criminal defence lawyer here in Adelaide, about SA's defence laws.
They're very vague, which is the problem, especially when it's that means testing of what is reasonable and unreasonable.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like a magistrate might not be the best person to make that determination, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in a number of organised fights through boxing and martial arts. I can tell you those are controlled environments. So there's a referee there to make sure things don't go overboard.
Yeah.
The two fighters have consented to this happening. But at the same time, knowing what I know from those experiences, sometimes I wouldn't be able to make those same decisions on the street.
Yeah.
You know, especially so for example, in the Jordan Grantham case, you know, he's kicked this guy when he's down, right? So that was one of the biggest factors, right? The guy's on the ground, the judge has made the decision saying, well, you could have run away at that point, right? I've seen many fighters, I've been in many fights where I've either been downed or the other person's been downed and then they've got back up and won the fight.
Yeah.
Especially against someone who's trained, who's sort of used to that sort of pain and that level of tolerance. It's a completely different scenario when it's on the street and you're not able to sort of make those quick decisions to go, oh, okay, yep, now I'm in a position where I can run away.
Oh, of course. And you're not, when you're in the moment, you're not really going like, is this going to be reasonable?
Yeah, exactly. You don't have time to think, let me defend my life, but make sure I don't cross the line.
Anyway, later in the show, we're going to continue with your story, Aj, on SA's defence laws. But coming up after the break, Hamish will be letting you know about what's been happening in politics this week.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength. We'll be getting back into our story on whether SA self-defence laws need a refresh. But now let's throw to Hamish to let us know what the hell is going on with politics this week.
What the hell is going on in politics at the moment? Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Yes, I know. The big story this week was, of course, the US election, namely Biden's eventual victory. Keyword, eventual. But we've still got our own stories happening on home soil, so let's get to it. But staying with the election for just a second, two of our own politicians, former US Ambassador Joe Hockey and Nationals MP George Christensen, have backed claims from Donald Trump that legitimate mail-in votes may be fraudulent in the wake of Biden's shocking comeback. Mr. Christensen was even slapped with a misinformation warning on Facebook, much like all of Trump's tweets on election day, with Labor leader Anthony Albanese slamming the comments. Meanwhile, the CEO of Australia Post, Christine Holgate, stepped down from her position this week after the controversial Cartier saga, where she gifted 4 employees with watches worth $20,000 as executive bonuses, presumably out of the taxpayer's pocket. The scandal has been a bad look for the company, which has faced recent criticism for parcel delays and increases in postal prices, and has called into question whether Australia Post is a commercial operation or a public service. Also in the news, ScoMo has once again faced increasing pressure this week from world leaders in Britain, France and Italy to confront the ever-growing climate crisis if he wishes to speak at an upcoming global summit. This comes off the back of new reports indicating that the Australian economy could lose out on over $3 trillion and almost 900,000 jobs if we don't aim for net zero emissions by 2050. And that's what the hell's been happening in politics this week.
Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having on Fresh 92.7.
Thanks for that, Hamish. Of course, like usual, a lot going on this week.
Yep.
Interesting that Hockey decided to side with all Trump's bizarre claims about election fraud.
I'm not even surprised at this point when it comes to Australian politicians putting their foot in their mouth.
Oh.
Also, the climate has gone up the creek and our Prime Minister has stuck his head in the sand. So...
What a shame, especially that we'll miss out on, $3 trillion of...
Yeah, that's just...
Like, is that not a no-brainer at this point? Like, even on an economic point of view, like, let alone it'll save the lives of humanity, but...
Well, on an economic point, a lot of our green policy actually makes much more economic sense than going back to coal and things like that, but... Again, we just had decades of, let's do the same old thing that we've done and let's not change it.
It's an absolute shame. Hopefully that people can hear that and get a kick up the butt.
Stay tuned for the rest of my feature coming up after the break. But right now, though, you're listening to Fresh 92.7.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength. Before the break, we heard from Craig Caldicott about SA's self-defence laws.
But I wanted to know what you can do to keep yourself safe without using excessive force. So I reached out to Adrian Cartland, a karate instructor for 25 years.
Wavelength. Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
I sat down with Adrian Cartland, a karate instructor with over 25 years of experience, who has also undertaken a number of other martial arts, including Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Judo, and holds the record for the fastest cage fighting knockout. We talked about how best to approach a real-life self-defense situation and how to keep yourself safe legally. If you're in a violent situation or a situation where you think it might become violent, what should you be doing? What should you be doing as a person?
So the question that you're really asking is legally, what do you need to do? So you have a legal right to be able to protect yourself from harm, and you can do the things that are necessary to protect yourself. Now, what does that mean? Well, it's actually really quite ambiguous. So if you are someone who is assaulted, the question that I'd like you to ask yourself is, am I being a good person? So that's really the self-defense question. So would a good person continue to defend themselves when they could easily walk away if you were cornered? Of course, you then need to respond. A good person would do that. The common questions you get is, can I assault them back? Of course. Can I punch them back? Can I kick them on the ground? Well, if you've hit them and they've fallen to the ground, would a good person do that? Now, maybe if you're a slight woman and this guy's a 6'6" bikie and you're convinced that he's going to get back up and beat you again, sure, it might make perfect sense to kick them while they're on the ground. On the other hand, if you're 6'6" and the other guy's 5 foot nothing and you've pushed him over, can you kick him on the ground? Well, clearly not. Again, it's going to come back to how good a person are you, and the judge is going to look at all of these factors surrounding the incident, and which they'll pick up from the evidence that has come along, and say, would a good person have acted in this way? And the more you are good, the more comfortable that you can be, that self-defense will apply, and you will not get charged with assault, because what you're doing if you're punching someone is assault.
Now, in those violent situations, they often happen in a very quick sort of scenario. It's often seconds that you've got. My particular fear is I don't fully know what this other person's background is. I don't know if they come from a martial art background. I don't know how much alcohol they've consumed. I don't know if they've taken any other illicit substances like ice or MDMA, which makes you much more stronger and violent and aggressive. So is there actually a reasonable amount of time, and do courts sort of consider that sort of judgment time when it comes to self-defense situations?
Yeah, the court is going to consider your subjective knowledge. And what you said about not having much time to make a decision, that really cuts to the crux of it. When someone is put under pressure, your true character comes out. And so if someone's coming at you and you go, look, I don't want to hurt them, I'm not out there to hurt people, which is the default response. Most people don't want to hurt other people. And you go, well, what can I do to not hurt this other person? I just need to get away. Can I try and talk them down? Can I push them away? Can I leave the area? Oh, they've caught me in a corner and I have to punch them back. Okay, that's fine. Let me give you an example. A couple of New Year's ago, I was in Rundle Street, and so there with my girlfriend at the time, and this guy was wildly drunk. He was falling over in the middle of the road. My girlfriend called out and said, hey, get off the road, someone will run you over. He heard that, stands up, comes towards her, and begins to swing. I stand in front, I just sort of easily dodge out of the way as he swings, and he has clearly thrown a punch at me. And then I just wait there and he stumbles off. My girlfriend says to me, why didn't you whack him back? You've been doing karate for all of these years. And I was like, why do I need to? What do I get? What am I gonna get? What am I, a great person? I've hit some drunk guy who's easier to hit than a punching bag. Now, on the other hand, if it wasn't me there, if it was my girlfriend who isn't a trained martial artist, and if she struck back, you go, well, is she reasonable to fear some drunk guy assaulting her? Probably yes. And so I would think that in that exact same situation, two different people would probably have two different reasonable outcomes.
Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having on Fresh 92.7.
That there was Arj chatting with Adrian Cartland, a karate instructor here in Adelaide, and he had some really good insights, I thought, then.
Yeah, no, it was really good to speak to him as well. It is just that thing of, in my personal opinion, you don't have a lot of time to sort of make a lot of these judgments, and I think there's a little bit too much ambiguity when it comes to the law for what is reasonable and what is unreasonable.
Yeah.
particularly because it's so much on a person-by-person case.
I mean, I do find it like the way he sort of described it quite helpful. Like, would a good person continue beating somebody up on the ground if they were just not knocked out cold? Probably not. That's not
No, without a doubt. It is one of those things as well. You've got to remember, in the heat of the moment, just because this guy is the initial aggressor does not give you the right to beat the ever-loving crap out of them.
Yeah.
You know, you just have to defend yourself enough. So
to get out of the situation.
Pretty much. So if I'm in a pub or something like that and someone's mad, you know, someone's going, hey, you know, what are you looking at? You know, and again, it's evolved into a fight. I don't need to beat the guy unconscious. I need to beat the guy to a point where it's like, all right, cool. He is
not going to fight
he's no longer a threat.
Yeah.
I don't need to kill the threat for it to no longer be a threat. I'm not John Wick.
No, really good story there, Arch. Really loved that one. Anyway, next, Wavelength explains what you need to know about what's happened with the coronavirus this week. But right now, you're listening to Fresh.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having.
Right now, we're getting into our weekly segment here where Wavelength explains what has happened with the coronavirus this week.
Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
While the rest of the world seems determined to play out the plotline of some horribly cliched post-apocalyptic blockbuster, here on home soil we've probably seen one of our most promising weeks since the country was plunged into confusion and uncertainty all those months ago. I say this with a whole lot of apprehension, but the situation in Victoria seems to finally be under control.
Crisis has been averted. Everything is super.
The state recorded its first consecutive week of 0 new infections, and restrictions are at last rapidly being rolled back as the hot streak continues. Yes, the taps are running again as pubs reopen across the state along with retail stores and restaurants, but no one cares about that. For the Vics, it's all about enjoying their first pint that hasn't been poured from a tinny, and we get it. From all of us here in Adelaide, cheers to that. And the good news continues across the country as we recorded our first national day of no new cases or deaths in almost 6 months. It's a pretty big deal. It shows just how far we've come, and we should all be really, really proud of that because things are not going so well in the other corners of the world. The UK is going back into a national lockdown as case numbers have gotten out of control yet again, and America, well, what can be said about America? Although Biden may finally put an end to the incompetent response that's been had so far, the damage may already be done, with a third wave currently rippling across the mainland, hitting a record 9 million total infections with 89,000 new cases a day. In fact, coronavirus is now the third leading cause of death across the country. Although Dr. Anthony Fauci, the country's chief health expert, may get to keep his job now that his biggest critic, Donald Trump, is out of office, you're fired. I'm not exactly sure that's something he even wants at this point. The task ahead remains a daunting challenge, to say the least. And while Fauci had plenty of praise for our response to the pandemic, he's not sure the same tactics would fly with a large number of Americans.
If you close down, and I never use the word shut down again, I mean, if I were to use the word shut down, I would be in serious trouble. They would probably be throwing tomatoes at me or something.
Meanwhile, our own health minister, Greg Hunt, who is presumably safe from fruit and veg attacks for now, has advised that Australia has secured 2 more potential virus vaccines, and we could expect to receive our first doses as early as March 2021, with the rest of Australia receiving the vaccine throughout the remainder of next year. So, things are looking up in Oz. Just keep doing the right thing and stay safe, Adelaide.
Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having on Fresh 92.7.
That there was Hamish letting you know everything you need to know about the coronavirus. You're listening to Fresh 92.7.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having.
Right now, we got our weekly segment called Heaps Good News. This week, Jamie's got the goods for us.
Heaps Good News on Wavelength.
Hey guys, it's Jamie here. It's nice to be able to focus on the good stuff. There's always a Heaps Good News story out there, and this week I've gotcha. Powerhouse Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, who announced her second-term cabinet last Monday, has just appointed New Zealand's first Indigenous Foreign Minister, Nanaia Mahuta. Nanai Mahuta is a woman of many daring firsts. Not only is she the country's first Foreign Affairs Minister for Maori development, but is also the first minister to have a traditional facial tattoo worn by Maori women known as moko kauai while serving in Parliament. The incredibly diverse cabinet of 20 includes 8 women, 5 of whom are Maori, as well as 3 who are openly LGBTQI+, and 3 who are from Pacific Island heritage. Following New Zealand's progressive history as the first country to cast the women's right to vote, Ms Mahuta has commented that she hopes many other women from Maori descent will see this as lifting the ceiling once again. Go New Zealand! This one goes out to the doggo lovers out there. Do you think dogs should be allowed into South Australian pubs and hotels? Well, you're not alone. Simone Douglas, owner of the Gilbert Street Hotel, is leading a movement to allow our four-legged dog friends inside hotel venues. Until a month ago, Ms Douglas was allowing patrons to bring their dogs inside with them, until Adelaide City Council workers came a-knocking to inform them that it was in fact breaking the law. Ms Douglas, an avid dog lover and owner of an Alaskan Malamute, has created a petition to lobby the federal government to review the legislation which bans dogs, not including service dogs of course, from indoor areas where food is served. Simone stated, "We think that it's time for the country to evolve and offer the same amenities as all hospitality venues do in Europe and America." She's hoping to get 1,000 signatures before presenting it to the federal government, so if you're on board, head to the Parliament of Australia website and look up petition EN 2026. And an amazing initiative and real-life application of a concept that stole Australia's heart has been put into practice. ABC documentary mini-series, Old People's Homes for 4-year-olds, has been put into action in a new care facility in Western New South Wales. The mini-series that started in 2017, led by scientists and gerontologists, was a revolutionary experiment bringing 10 elderly care home residents into a classroom of 10 preschoolers. With social isolation being one of the largest problems for those in elderly care, the social experiment exposed how tough life can be for older Australians and wanted to determine if this simple act would improve lives. Not only did it promote movement and improve physical health of the elderly, but also improved mental health dramatically. The Maranatha Gunya Reintegrational Learning Centre in Wellington, New South Wales, has started welcoming residents from the neighbouring Maranatha House aged care facility. It's the first of its kind in Australia and will offer regular interaction between residents and preschool children. Hopefully we can start seeing this around more of Australia. That's it for tonight, and thanks for listening to Heaps Good News.
Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having on Fresh 92.7.
Thank you for that, Jamie. Anyway, that brings us to the end of tonight's show. Thanks for listening and thanks for joining me tonight. Oh.
Yeah, thanks. It's been a pleasure joining here tonight. Make sure you subscribe to the Wavelength podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you get your podcasts. You can listen back to our old episodes right now and you'll be the first to know when tonight episodes goes up.
Wavelength.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.